Martin Luther King Jr. was not always committed to the path of nonviolence. He was not always a believer in the nonviolent way is the best way. A young Martin Luther King was not quite sure how he could contend for justice. He was just sure that the two polar opposites that he saw weren't going to work out for him. He didn't see them as the most faithful way. He didn't see them as the most helpful way. On the one side, he had theological liberalism, and on the other side, he had fundamentalism. For the theological liberalism, the ideology, he just believed that it was kind of empty, that he liked the vision for social utopia. He could get behind it, but that it was way too optimistic regarding human nature because he knew that human nature corrupted all institutions and power systems. And so, though he liked that theological liberalism critiqued power, what he found most troubling was that the problem isn't in just the power or position, but the problem is in us. The only difference is that we aren't in power yet. And on the other side, he had fundamentalism, and he didn't see that as providing the most helpful way forward because they were more stuck in what he'd argue the past. They were not contending for justice. It was a strict, rigid biblicism that did not see a world outside of the ancient Near Eastern context, and so he did not find much hope in fundamentalism. And he said this, he said, one of the reasons he had a problem with fundamentalism was because it did not translate into social change, and here's what he says: a religion that professes a concern for the souls of men and is not equally concerned about the slums that damn them, the economic conditions that strangle them, and the social conditions that cripple them. It is a spiritually moribund religion. He knew the scriptures that talked about turning the other cheek, about forgiveness, but he had not seen it lived out in his context until he met Mahatma Gandhi. Until he learned of the nonviolent revolution that Gandhi led in India against British colonists or colonization. Gandhi's radical commitment to nonviolence, it enraptured Dr. King. And he said, as I delved deeper into the philosophy of Gandhi, my skepticism concerning the power of love gradually diminished. And I came to see for the first time that the Christian doctrine of love, operating through the Gandhian method of nonviolence, is one of the most potent weapons available to an oppressed people in their struggle for freedom. So King took a mediating position between what he saw as theological liberalism and fundamentalism, which he got from following and understanding the way of Jesus, and he married it with the Gandhian method of nonviolence. And so he had the philosophy of Jesus's ministry married with the Gandhian method. He had practice and he had the philosophy. He saw nonviolence as the way forward. And he would preach messages on it, and he would stand unmoved and committed to the message of nonviolence in the face of degradation and violence done against him. He saw nonviolence as, quote, a way of life. And listen, the way of nonviolence is that of painstaking patience. But he said this in one sermon. He said, I would not wish to give the impression that nonviolence will accomplish miracles overnight. Men are not easily moved from their mental ruts or purged from their prejudiced and irrational feelings. When the underprivileged demand freedom, the privileged at first react with bitterness and resistance. even when the demands are couched in nonviolent terms. The initial response is substantially the same, but the nonviolent approach does something in the hearts and souls of those committed to it. He says the nonviolent process is transformative for the people committed to the nonviolent process, this long-suffering, patient process of nonviolent transformation. He says it gives them a new self-respect. It calls up resources of strength and courage they did not know they had finally. It so stirs the conscience of the opponent that reconciliation becomes a reality. It so stirs the conscience of the opponent that reconciliation becomes a reality. For a king, the patient, long-suffering process of nonviolence transforms the person, it transforms the individual committed to it, and it opens the possibility for the first time for reconciliation with those who are receiving the nonviolent protest. And here's what I want to draw your attention to. It's the long, painstaking patience of nonviolence. It takes self-restraint. It's a commitment to a new vision of progress and justice, and above all, it required patience. Patience when things were dark, patience in the face of brutality, patience that the way of love would eventually, at the end of all things, even if it's not realized now, that love would triumph, proven in Christ's resurrection and ascension. And here's what King knew from reading the scriptures. Patience creates space for renewal. Patience creates space for renewal. Last week, we saw the importance of gentleness. It's not a popular character trait, but Paul emphasized that it's one of the top 4 things required to build an uncommon community. In order to foster a healthy, loving, united community, you need 4 ingredients, and this week we are digging into patience. And so here's Ephesians 4. Here's the text that's been driving the beginning of our series. It reads, "Therefore I, the prisoner in the Lord, urge you to walk worthy of the calling you have received." How? With humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, making every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. That third element that Paul is talking about is patience. He names it here. Now, here's what Pastor Tim Keller says of patience. He says, our modern culture is probably the least able to produce patience in human history. Other cultures have practices and habits that form patience in its members, but the American capitalistic, consumeristic moment, patience is an inconvenience, patience is old tech, patience is the reason that we upgrade. Patience for us is less a virtue and more a signal that something is terribly wrong, in need of attention, which is, if I'm inconvenienced, let's replace it. Sarah Schnitker, associate professor of psychology at Baylor. I did not think I'd get her name right, so here we are. And actually, I don't know her. I might have still gotten her name wrong. I was boasting for no reason. Okay, Sarah Schnitker, the associate professor for psychology at Baylor, she gives us 3 main spaces that demand patience in our world. 3 main categories, 3 main places that typically demand patience. And she says there is, I'll run through it and then we'll talk about it a little bit. So there is daily hassle patience, hardship patience, and interpersonal patience. First, daily hassle patience. Daily hassle patience is the kind of patience required for everyday things. It's waiting in line at the calf. It is waiting for a class to start. It is waiting for a friend to get ready or waiting for a significant other to get ready. I feel like I spend a lot of my time doing that, Turning trying to learn, daily hassle patience is trying to learn for a class or trying to learn your mind-body connection. If you are an athlete trying to learn a new mind-body connection, really, daily hassle patience is about waiting. Now, the second kind of patience is hardship patience. This is the open-ended kind of patience when you're walking through difficulty and you just aren't sure when it will end. It's when you're dealing with it's when you're dealing with mental health troubles. And you're not quite sure when it'll end, if it'll end, what this looks like. It's hardship patience. When you have persistent concerns or uncertainty, when you or someone you love has an illness, or dare I say, a pandemic, this is hardship patience. It's the second category that demands patience, but there's a third one. There's a third category that demands patience, and that is interpersonal. This is the kind of patience needed between you and another person when you're dealing with your roommate or your parents or friend or a teammate. Whether they're trying to be difficult or not, this kind of patience is required often when there's conflict or some kind of issue or they're just annoying. Like, my wife has interpersonal patience more frequently than I think she has daily hassle patience because of me. Because there's interpersonal patience required when you are just in close proximity with somebody else. And for us that's trying to create an uncommon community, this is the kind of patience that we may run into quite frequently, and we might have, if we are talking about unity, that we might have in the forefront of our mind when we say, yeah, but there's a lot of conflict here. Daily hassle patience, hardship patience, interpersonal patience. It's really no surprise that Tim Keller, again, defines patience as, quote, the ability to take trouble from others or from life without blowing up. Because isn't that the opposite of patience, blowing up? I think that's the opposite of everything we're talking about with patience. It's blowing up at someone, fighting, it's restlessness, it's the can't wait to move on syndrome. You're forgetting where you are now in vision for the future. It's speeding across campus. It's being quick-tempered, irritable, myopically focused on my world and my world only. I don't have time or space for anybody else's. One commentator talking about patience said it like this. He says that patience is the cautious endurance that does not abandon hope. And isn't that also true? That patience is endurance? That when you're waiting, doesn't it feel like endurance? When you've got an interpersonal conflict you have to work through, doesn't it feel like endurance? It's hard to not respond out of a sense of defensiveness or, yeah, but what about me? I need to be heard, but it's endurance. It's endurance driven by hope. It's hope that today won't copy over into tomorrow, that we'll have a stronger friendship at the end of this crisis, that will build the mind-muscle connection. It's this hope. For King, he endured jail and bombings and a stabbing because he had hope. He had hope that one day God would bring justice through nonviolence. That violence was not required for justice to see its day. But everything in our world programs us for impatience. Everything in our world programs us to reject the need for patience. We have incredibly short attention spans. And patience represents inefficiencies. Patience is a waste of time, it's boredom, it's waste, it's compromise. And I think there are really four main spaces where we reject patience because of where we are, because of what we feel. And I think the first of that is when we are experiencing pain or discomfort. When we're experiencing pain or discomfort, we just want to get out from under the suffering as quick as possible. We don't want to sit in it. We don't want to learn from it. All we can think about is, when is this going to be over? 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 Like when I do cardio, it's kind of like that. When is this going to be over? When is this going to be over? When is it? Some of you know what I'm talking about. I can't do the treadmill. I hate running. Because I just feel like I hear my breath over and over again saying, like, stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it. Because we want to get out from under it. We're not really interested in experiencing what it has to offer us. And in the example of physical activity, it might actually be really good for you. But we're not interested in it. We want to move past it. I think the second category is trust, that we don't believe our waiting is redemptive. We don't actually trust that God is doing anything in the moment. We want the job, we want the surety, we want that thing right now, here, because we don't fundamentally believe that there is a purpose in the waiting. We believe that there is only inconvenience in the waiting. It's wasted space. But what if God was to say, actually, this is a trust issue, and there is purpose in the waiting. There is redemption in the waiting. And like King knew, there is renewal in the waiting. Or how about this one? Pressure. Pressure. Because we feel the need to be somewhere or someone else. I think of all of them, this is our problem on the forefront. I think the other ones are absolutely there. And I know some of the stories in our community that pain and discomfort and trust, these are certainly problems, but I think for you, for a majority of you, it's pressure. The reason that we throw off patience, the reason that we are not interested in patience is because we sincerely believe at the core of our being that we are in the absolute wrong spot and everybody else is in the right spot. And so we need to follow their path as quickly as possible. And so the expectation is that when you graduate, you step right into a six-figure job and that you start a family right away, or that you start your career and you're able to accumulate things because you feel the pressure to perform, the pressure to look good, the pressure to have succeeded, the pressure to have proved all your haters wrong, to show all your followers that you have what it takes. It's the pressure. And if I was to ask you who's actually giving you that pressure, you probably would not be able to point at a specific person, but just go, I don't know. What if the pressure is coming from you and you alone because you think you are behind? And what if the Lord says, you're not behind? Relax. The fourth category, I think, is hurry and busyness. The fourth reason that we are not patient is because we are caught up in hurry and busyness. We literally just want to be somewhere else. If we wanted to get out from suffering and pain, and we didn't want to believe that our pain or waiting is redemptive with trust, or we felt the need to be somewhere else with pressure, sociologically, whatever, with hurriness, it's often we feel literally like we need to be somewhere else. And when somebody asks us how we are doing, in fact, I was at my in-laws' place last night, and somebody asked me, hey, how's life outside of Judson? And my retort was, I don't think there is a life outside of Judson. I'm very busy. I'm writing a message on patience talking about how hurry is like But my first initial response, the very thing that I felt needed to be communicated to this person was, I am busy. Why? Why? Because for us in the West, busyness is a badge of honor. Busyness means that we are in demand. Busyness means that people want our time and attention, that we are maximizing our time on this earth. Busyness means that we are running at a frenetic pace, but it's all important. It's all good. Busyness is a badge of honor in our culture, and yet what Paul encourages us to be is patient. It might be that the best way to live is not the busy life, but the patient life. The best things in life are slow and difficult. This is the hard word that I do not think will translate to most of you. I think a lot of you are going to have to walk through some really difficult seasons to learn that the best things in life are hard and difficult. I know that's what I had to learn. My nickname growing up from my dad was Ready, Fire, Aim. In that order. That I would be ready, I would take action, and then I would aim later. That I was so caught up in what it is that I was doing, I was just impulsive. I was just moving on from thing to thing to thing. I thought I was multitasking, but that's a myth. And so I was just like taking my shot no matter where it went, no matter how it looked, no matter what the outcome was. Because I did not want to accept that the best things in life were slow and difficult. I thought I could microwave my way into success, into progress, into healthy relationships. But listen, building a career and vocation, that takes time. It is slow and difficult. You will not leave Judson and jump right into a six-figure career. It just doesn't happen. Often you have to be building on something. You have to be gathering your skills and bringing things together and working on yourself and leadership development and making step after step after step. And it is absolutely not glamorous. But the problem is you feel the pressure to perform and be a 50-year-old person in your vocation when you are incredibly young. You have your entire life ahead of you, and you believe that you need to be there now. Building a good career that is satisfying, something that uses your gifts, something that explores your passions, that takes time. It is a gentle movement of the Spirit of God in you to move from here to here to here, to bring your personality and passions and gifts together, and that takes time. How about family? Getting to a place of health. Getting to a place of health with family, it takes an incredible amount of patience because no one really knows how to push your buttons, and you don't know how to push anybody else's buttons better than your family. It takes cautious endurance. Or how about learning? It's one connection after the other. I was a biblical studies major and a Greek major, ancient Greek. I had been asked on resume, like when I go to interview, they're like, what was your major? Why did you choose ancient Greek? And I was like, I don't actually know. But I can tell you that I chose it to prove something to myself, which is a whole story for something else later. But the process of learning a language, it takes painstaking patience. It is one vocab word, and then two vocab words, and then three vocab words, and then declining nouns, and then parsing verb. It's one move after the other. You cannot hack languages. Or how about friendships when overcoming conflict? When overcoming conflict, it takes patient endurance. Our Ephesians text, it puts patience in the context of building unity because you can't have community if you aren't patient. You can't have community if you do not plan to be patient to your neighbor or friend, or finally your spiritual growth, spiritual maturity. That takes patience. Eugene Peterson puts it like this: it takes long obedience in the same direction. It takes long obedience in the same direction. Now, the Bible talks about patience a lot, and it seems like every single time you encounter the people of God, they're either waiting for God to speak, they're waiting for God to act, whether it's the promised land, or for a king, or for the resurrection, or for his return. And Jesus is seen over and over again modeling the kind of patience that we are to have in community. And there's this one story in particular where Jesus is going to the cross and he pulls his loudest, most brash disciple aside and he says, I want you to know that you will deny me 3 times before the rooster crows. So before dawn, you are going to deny me over the course of this evening 3 times, which I think is an act of mercy, which we'll get to later. He says, you will deny me 3 times. I will know about it and I don't condemn you right now for it. And so, sure enough, what happens? Jesus goes to the cross. He bears the pain, the scorn, the mocking. They nail him to a tree. They crucify him naked, exposed in the most grotesque way possible that the Romans could think of. And what happens? Peter denies Jesus 3 times. If you fast forward in the story, Peter thinks all hope is gone, and he runs back to his profession because he has to put his life back together. He has to find a way to make a living. He has to provide for his family. He has to put his world back together. And so he goes back to what he knows. He goes back to fishing. And as he's fishing, a man walks up on the shore and calls Peter's name. And he goes, this is Jesus. He's risen from the dead. This is incredible. And so he gets out of his boat, runs or swims. You know, he can't walk on water. We knew that from a story. He swims all the way to Jesus. And he shows up to Jesus on the shore. And Jesus is cooking a meal. And Jesus says to Peter, the gentle Jesus that we talked about last week, Jesus says to Peter, Peter, do you love me? Peter says, yes, Lord, of course I do. He says, feed my sheep. He says, Peter, do you love me? Peter says, yes, I've answered this. Yes, I do. I'm so sorry. That's my bad. I don't really know what came over me. Yes, of course I do. You were right. We should have all known Jesus. I love you. And Jesus says, then feed my sheep. And he asked Peter a 3rd time, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, of course I do. What are you really getting at? And Jesus says, feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. The very mouth that you used to say you were not of me, the very mouth that you used to deny me when I was walking to the cross in patience and long suffering to bear the sins of the world, that very mouth, I would like you to use it to build the church and feed my sheep. And so for every denial that you've brought, Peter, I would like to offer you a word of grace and peace, that there is a place for you in the church. That you are going to lead the church into a whole new future, and that you, Peter the denial, that is not your final name. You will be known as the rock that builds my church. Jesus was patient with Peter, and he offered Peter 3 things. He said, Peter, in the course of this, 3 times I ask you, and 3 times you affirm that you are actually my disciple, that you are following in the way of Jesus. I ask you to release. Jesus invited Peter to release the thing that had gone wrong, to release the anxiety that he was feeling, to release the problem, and just trust. And that brings us to number 2, to rest. In the 3 questions of Jesus, Jesus was inviting Peter to actually rest and slow down enough to hear the words of Jesus, offer words of love and grace, because when you are going at breakneck speed, when you are lacking the ability to listen to your friend because you do not have patience for them, it is really difficult to hear the voice of the Lord. It's not that the Spirit is not speaking. It's not that Jesus is not speaking. It's not that he is absent from you or hiding himself from you. Could it be that we aren't slowing down? That we don't have patience? for the voice of the Lord to offer words of care. And the third thing that Jesus offers Peter is renewal. He offers Peter renewal. He says, Peter, I'm actually working here. I actually have plans for you, and the very thing that you thought was a problem, I will use it to redeem and sustain your ministry. And so when we ask the question, what does it look like for us to grow in patience? What does it look like for us to manifest this patience? We can't look to culture. Culture does not have time for patience. We cannot look to ourselves. We don't have enough patience. We look to Jesus because Jesus is the one that has patience on our behalf. He bore the cross in patience, in long suffering on our behalf, and He